Okay, hello everybody. We are still waiting for a few people to trickle in from the waiting room. So I appreciate your patience while we get that started. Just as a quick reminder, this is being recorded, so be aware of your camera and mic settings. We will have a pretty packed panelist group today, so we'll get started as soon as the waiting room starts to slow down a little bit. I think we have a pretty good group here of just under 220 participants. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining our SB 1383 chat with CalRecycle. This month, we'll be focusing on procurement, programs, implementation practices, and providing a forum for all of our great stakeholders to really interact with each other and with the department. Next slide, please, Darren. So we will be conducting a question and answer session after we get a chance to get all of our information from our panelists. For this, please stick with utilizing the question and answer pane or panel rather than the chat feature. It allows us to better track and ensure we have timely follow-up with you all. Please try to focus on SB 1383 implementation for these questions. If it's something that we don't have time to get to or feel that there's a better forum for those answers, we will go ahead and contact you directly, or you may submit your questions to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. If you do have your microphone enabled, someone from our team will go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question. And with that, I think we will pass to Michelle Martin for a quick grant update. Next slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Ray. So I have some exciting news to share. We have finalized the draft criteria for the second round of funding for the SB 1383 Local Assistance Grant Program. The allocation for this next round has increased to $90 million. We anticipate releasing the draft criteria via our listserv tomorrow, June 22nd. And for those that are not aware of what this program is about, the 1383 Local Assistance Grant Program is a non-competitive grant program that provides funding to local jurisdictions to assist with 1383 implementation. Eligible applicants include cities, counties, regional or joint power authorities, and special districts directly responsible for solid waste collection. We invite you to review the draft criteria and comment on what we are proposing in writing so that we can review and consider all of those comments. If all goes as planned, we anticipate releasing that draft criteria tomorrow and request comments submitted by July 7th. Please note that grant resolutions will be required for this cycle. We are not accepting payment program resolutions. We will provide resolution templates for individual and regional applicants in the listserv announcement. Again, all of this will be included in the listserv message, so please sign up to receive notification. Many of you are already on that listserv, but we will put a link to that listserv in the chat. And with that, I will turn it back to either Ray or Kathy.
I'll take over here. Thanks, Michelle.
Kathy.
So, folks, just wanted to, go back one slide, please, Darren. There we go. The implementation plan for Lambd and Jace. Let's see here. There we go. Sorry about that. Just wanted to remind folks, there was an email that was sent out in April that gave all of this information about the recycled content requirements for janitorial supplies increasing for the jurisdictions per SB 1383, but because of AB 661. So the procurement and recycled content paper web pages have been updated to reflect these changes. that AB 6651 had on public contract code 12209. We'll probably, I think there might be a link. Oh yeah, it's already been updated to the web pages, so we're good to go with that. And then also other web pages that were updated is using recycled organics products, recycled content paper requirements, which I just mentioned, and recycled content and recyclable paper certification form. All of those things have been updated. And here we go. Our next slide. Ron Alexander is our first speaker, Ron Alexander and Associates. He's been working with the composting and organics recycling industry for 40 years. Thanks so much for being with us today, Ron, and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathleen. Thanks, CalRecycle. I think I'm going to actually turn my video off so I'm not distracted. Thank you. I'm happy to be here to assist in any way I can. Obviously, the implementation of 1383 for jurisdictions there's going to be a lot of things to work through, and all these things take time, as we know. Next, please. So 1383 is upon us, and jurisdictions are going to have to look at modifying the way they purchase specific products, and so they're going to have to modify potential purchasing language, document language, and some of the people within jurisdictions are going to actually have to change their purchasing habits. It's really, really important for jurisdictions to make sure that they're purchasing products that are eligible when they think they're eligible, especially if supply gets strapped. Next. So the requirement, if we just ignore green energy right now, we're going to have to, jurisdictions are going to need to use and purchase more recycled compost and mulch. There is real preparation work to be done here. Implementation is going to affect budgets. It's great to know there's going to be more grants coming along from CalRecycle, but it is important to understand that the use of compost and mulch, larger volumes, is going to affect things like logistics and staffing and application equipment, things like that. Some jurisdictions are going to have to figure out who's in charge internally and if they need assistance outside their own entity to help implement. Jurisdictions are going to have to get started, or they should get started, in the process of figuring out what they're currently using. Can it be replaced? And that's going to take an internal audit to take place. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. Next, please. So eligible composts, as most of us know, come from licensed solid waste management facilities. That specific terminology is going to have to be put into purchasing documents. Other certifications maybe goes into the same language. And I think what we're going to find here is as things move along, there's going to be public and private programs that help assist jurisdictions locate and purchase these materials. Next, please. As far as mulches go, not quite as simple in my mind as compost is. Still have to purchase materials from eligible licensed type facilities, as listed here. As you can see, there are a variety of mulches that are going to be eligible, including things like arbor mulches and dyed pallet mulches and ground wood that are processed at a licensed facility, and composted mulch products. It will be important to understand that jurisdictions who are managing their own tree trimmings at parks, if they regrind them, that is not eligible, nor is material from chip and grind facilities. Next, please. In general, the majority of 1383 eligible compost products are going to be derived from yard trimmings and food residuals. Next. We should note that that there are a lot of different uses for compost. For that reason, the desired characteristics of the product are going to be based on the application. I'll talk a little bit about this at the end, but there are a series of specification documents that can help jurisdictions when it comes to purchasing. And it should be important to know that, you know, the feedstocks of the characteristics of the feedstock that go into the compost do impact the characteristics of the finished compost. And they're going to, again, vary on end use. Next. When we look at choosing a proper compost product or a mulch product, it's important to get a sample. Unlike soil, you know, you're going to want to get about a gallon sample. It will be helpful to get technical information, end use information, test data from the supplier upfront, and specifying and using certified products will help you along the way, certainly. But it's also going to be important as things go along that there are people within the jurisdiction who are somewhat knowledgeable on how to interpret test data and understand where certain compost should be used. Next. It's getting easier and easier to identify compost products and 1383 eligible products through websites that are popping up. Next. Further, composters are starting to look at ways to help jurisdictions, buyers, track the materials that are being used. We're going to find that there are things like compost and mulches that are 100% eligible, recyclable products, but we're also going to find that there are probably soil products that are blended that may be 30, 40, 50, 60% eligible. And I'm hoping we're going to continue to see composters jump here and actually do the math on the invoices to help jurisdictions. That's already starting to happen. Next. Further, different trade organizations, both ones that represent the composting and recycling industry, as well as end user groups, are starting to teach courses like they did with the MWILO, and I expect that that'll continue. Next. And going back to efforts or potential cost, there is education that's going to need to be done within jurisdictions. That can either be done internally or you're going to get somebody from the outside to assist you. There is some time that's going to need to be taken to modify specifications and BMP documents when it comes to soil products. Not really painful to do, but somebody with the right technical background should be doing it. Whether you are hiring contractors or using inside internal staff, there will be additional staffing necessary to apply greater volumes of compost. And it really is important that there is buy-in from the top down, because some end users who like a specific mulch or a compost that may not be eligible are going to need to be probably convinced about making a purchasing change. Next, please. A big part of using the product is getting it on the ground. So it is important to know that whoever is going to be in charge of using this material is going to have to have the appropriate equipment available to them. And the type of equipment you need is going to be based on the type of product you're applying and the size of the job and the application rate. Certainly the type of project. Next. And, you know, there's a big difference between applying small layers like top dressing turf or a 2-inch layer to incorporate into the soil. And you can obviously see the application on slopes with blower trucks. So one of the big things that's going to need to be addressed in the future going forward with the jurisdictions is you may have equipment, but they may need to scale up the volume capacity of that equipment, because that's where time is lost in application. Next, please. So again, jurisdictions should start with an internal audit to figure out where they could be using more product. Next. And first thing you're going to want to know is what's being specified and utilized now. Later on, you're going to want to figure out why, if it's something that hurts your head, you're not sure about. But there are lots of applications. It's going to be important for jurisdictions to reach out to all different departments that may be involved in construction or maintenance. Next. There's going to be two major areas that you have to look at. Number one is internal documents, if there are any. Are there best management practices, or is there any code related to the types of mulch you purchase? Are there any written specifications? That's going to be important to know by reaching out to the different departments. Somebody within your team or working with your team is going to need to evaluate that and see if they need to be upgraded, and if so, how. Again, it's going to be very, very important for the solid waste people within jurisdictions to have good communications and outreach to the people who are going to use the material. Most people who are going to use these materials are very, very hands-on, and they're typically really, really tied into the products they purchase. They do it themselves. Next. And in the same realm, we're going to have to look, jurisdictions are going to have to look internally at bid documents for construction and landscaping. They're going to need to gather them and review them again. It's going to even be a little bit harder on these big outside projects because you're going to be going through general contractors who then hire other contractors like landscapers and landscape architects. And this kind of 1383 eligible product requirement is going to have to trickle down through that whole process. I would argue that that would be a requirement of the general contractor, and then it would they would be responsible for reporting how much of the materials were actually used at the end of the project before final payment for the project. Certain jurisdictions, I've been asked to help them develop allowable supplier lists, but these things are going to be available. I also learned that I am not a Californian, so as we do all these things, we're going to have to run all this stuff through lawyers, and that's going to take a little bit more time. So although we have all these things we have to do, and there is an understanding that we can change, there's environmental purchasing, we're going to have to make sure all the legal aspects are tied up in the paperwork. Next. So next, go ahead and modifying BMPs and specifications. Go ahead. As you're going to have to physically get your hands on specifications and documents. I've been doing this for clients. Sometimes they exist, sometimes they are hard to get your hands on. And again, their outreach is going to be very, very important internally. And there's going to be certain applications and certain end uses where you may need to help convince people internally to switch the potential projects that they're using. And there's going to probably have to be some internal enforcement. I don't know how that happens personally. Next. It should be important to understand, the idea of modifying construction and maintenance specifications based on environmental law or is not a new thing. This has happened. There are lots of initiatives whether it comes to saving irrigation water like MWELO, and this has happened elsewhere around the country, as well as soils for salmon in Seattle for fixing soils. Using recycled products to manage stormwater. These are all things that have been done. So this should not be the heaviest lift. It's just going to take a while to get everything obviously implemented. It's also important to know that, cities or jurisdictions are not always going to be able to use all the product that they're required to purchase. So we're going to have to be creative on new applications, potentially on public lands and such. Next. It should be noted that when it comes to the actual purchasing of these materials, there are specification packages that exist that can be made available to people, which outline how to use what product you want to purchase. Next. The specifications will typically have numerical standards for the product and how-to instructions, as you can see on the right-hand side of the page. Next. There is a new package that was released last year from the U.S. Composting Council, and these they're calling return on investment specs. They're similar to the specs you saw on the last slide, but there's also information on the economic benefits to the use of the material. These may be useful for selling the concept of using these materials internally. Next, please. Again, I'm just going to mention that it is important for the people who are involved in purchasing these materials to take a little time. You don't have to be an expert, but it's going to be helpful if you understand and can review the technical information, the test data that's coming in, and understand if it meets specification for your specific product or not. Next. There have been a lot of early adopters when it comes to installing compost and recycled mulch products into their specs. City of Emeryville was one of the first ones. Next, please. I've worked with the city of San Jose for many years, and Michelle Young, we've been able to swap out the use of compost, and this was an erosion control project. Next, please. Even Caltrans uses huge volumes of compost throughout the state, and they have a series of specifications that are out there right now. Next, please. So specifications are out there. You may need some input on identifying which ones are the best for you. It is important to know if people who are on this call, this webinar, are in charge of specifying things. It is important to know that one of the things that you can do right off the bat is modify, how you specify soil amendments. If you don't want things like manure or peat, just replace it and just say you're going to use compost. There are going to be a variety of potential suppliers, so it won't be a sole source situation problem. Next. Again, getting near the end here, it's going to be important for jurisdictions to understand where they can use material. And I'll just run through very, very quickly the primary jurisdictional applications for products. Next, please. Landscaping is probably the most obvious and will be the compost and mulch will be used the most on landscape garden creation. Wherever you see when I'm circling here one of these spec sheets, that means there is an existing spec sheet that was developed by the U.S. Composting Council and available for you all to easily download. Next, please. Turf applications, although there's less and less turf being installed because it takes water, there will be turf and or vegetation that is even low input vegetation that will be established where compost will be incorporated into the soil or top dressed along the top of the soil. Next. That's especially the case on sports turf, where we can use compost on turf to actually help the reduction or reduce usage of irrigation and nutrients and pesticides. Next. Erosion control, a newer application. This is a big one for jurisdictions. You can go into, you're going to have to deal with not landscape architects, but the engineering departments that deal with stormwater and erosion, and show them how you could use a coarse compost to stabilize slopes, get vegetation, and help in the management of stormwater. And there are even things like berms and socks that can be used in erosion control. Next. One of the things I'd like to bring up here as we're finishing is that lots of jurisdictions have areas that need some environmental help, okay? And they've been left alone. Well, I think the opportunity to use compost, and especially on some areas or in a city or a jurisdiction that needs some assistance, revegetation, soil improvement, this may be a great application for cities and jurisdictions who can't use all the volume that they need. There may be a place that can be fixed and then later on used by the public. Next. And I do want to mention that stormwater application, many people in the Bay Area know that there are specifications for bioretention soils. They're typically a mixture of compost and sand. That's another use for the material. Next. Urban agriculture will be something I think that continues to grow, community gardens and smaller urban intensive farms. And both of these places will probably be used as distribution hubs moving forward. Next. And just finishing up here, if jurisdictions cannot use all the product again that they're required to use, and it's going to be tough for the big cities, okay? It's going to be tough. It takes some thought here on what to do. Should we be bringing that material to agriculture? Well, that's a great environmental benefit, but there are farmers who buy compost. I talked about the possibility of using compost in reclamation. Giveaways to the public are good, but we don't want to interfere with companies that are reselling the product. Next, please. So there are things that people are going to have to figure out, and there's not going to be a one size fits all for all jurisdictions. So finally, so 1383 requirements are here. There are still questions and issues that will be changing, I'm sure, over time as far as implementation. But jurisdictions really need to consider how are they going to meet their requirements and see if they need help in doing so. Starting off with an internal audit and looking at the specifications that exist for construction projects, considering how they're going to track the use of the material, how they're going to educate staff and contractors is a real key. And then finally, install the proper specification language to allow and really prefer the usage of these eligible products. So thank you for that. And you can go to my last slide. There's my contact details. I'm not hard to find. Thank you. And I'll be around for questions later on.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was a fabulous presentation. Lots of information, got down into a little bit of the technical stuff, and I anticipate several questions coming your direction. Thanks again. Next up, we have Leo Beckerman, Director of Operations for Zero Foodprint. And following Leo's presentation, we'll have some brief comments from somebody who's already been working with Leo, Michelle Young, Senior Waste Management Analyst for the County of Santa Clara. With that, thanks, Leo. Take it away.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks to CalRecycle, and especially thanks to Ron. I think you made it. It is very difficult, and I'll tell everyone. Hopefully, here we can simplify it a little bit for you. I'll tell you about our program and about simplifying 1383 procurement. So we're Zero Foodprint, and I'm going to talk to you about one of our programs called Compost Connector, which is why we're here today. But I want to give you a little bit of background on Zero Foodprint. Next slide, please. So Zero Foodprint is a nonprofit based in California, and we are first and foremost a climate organization. We're looking to turn growing food into something that is incredibly climate beneficial. So we are also kind of all about collective action. We work with individuals, businesses, philanthropists, and state and federal governments to essentially compound dollars. And what we end up doing is re-granting the majority of those funds out to farms and ranches for essentially carbon farming practices. It's also known as regenerative agriculture or climate smart agriculture as well. And so before 1383 even was kind of on our radar, we were out there giving farms and ranches grants for implementing the most cost-effective carbon farming practice, essentially the most carbon sequestration for the dollar. Next slide, please. And over about 3 years, what we saw is that the majority, over 75% of our grants to farms and ranches involved, what you can see up here is compost. And I also want to bring in just a little bit of the amazing potential from not just an agricultural perspective, but from a climate perspective. And you see here a quote from Dr. Wendy Silver, who's highly involved in compost and research around compost use in agriculture, particularly rangeland. Next slide, please. So we saw 1383 coming and we got very interested in it because this was really an opportunity that we saw as a way for us to meet the needs of farms and ranches in California by compost and meet the needs of jurisdictions. And as you just heard from Ron, there is a lot going on. And this is something that Zero Foodprint does day in and day out anyway, already because of our work with farms and ranches and compost use in agriculture. So we thought we would be able to find a great home for all of that compost. We knew that because of our grants and our existing processes that we'd be able to keep all the records and keep track of every single project and maintain a compliant sort of relationship so that we could make that as a service essentially to jurisdictions. And then on top of that, we know and we're able to model, and I'll get into that a little bit later, the climate benefits, the greenhouse gas drawdown. And so there are opportunities for 1383 as a short-lived climate pollutant avoidance to turn into long-term sequestration through compost use in agriculture. And for that sequestration to play a part in a climate action plan or a local sequestration plan or a decarbonization plan if your jurisdiction has that. Next slide, please. So we started kind of building tools for jurisdictions, and this is a literal screenshot of our website. You can see that we have both a interactive map as well as a list of compliant facilities, so that it's a little easier to navigate than some of the other resources out there. It's literally it functions like a Google map if you've used that before, and you can search for facilities by city and or name as well. So we started there, and then we said, let's actually make a bigger program out of this. Next slide, please. So Compost Connector is the name of that program, and it's serving essentially two populations. One is the jurisdiction, and then the other is farmer rancher looking for compost. On the jurisdiction side, we put together basically a pretty simple overview. So we sign a direct service provider contract, making sure that there is a relationship between the jurisdiction and just Zero Foodprint. That's one contract, so that you don't have to manage a contract with 100 or 150 farms. So that's a simplification right there. We then go about our process where we're essentially matchmaking the jurisdiction and the jurisdiction's dollars or compost with farms and ranches that are interested in that. We handle the procurement and the actual payment. We do oftentimes essentially it's a partial payment, and I'll give an example up in the next. Don't go to the next slide yet, but I'll give an example in a moment or two. And then of course, really the one of the hardest parts is the record keeping and the reporting. And again, that's an element that in our relationships with jurisdictions that is outsourced. So Zero Foodprint handles all of that for you, and I will show you a little bit of what we offer. Next slide, please. So this is purely as an example, but some of these true costs are reflective of what we see in agriculture. So true costs, you look at compost, which does vary, and it varies by product type and location, but let's say $25 per ton. And then what we see is that compost is often, at least in agriculture, the lowest cost element of a total project. And so what I mean by project is when a farmer applies compost on a crop or on a rangeland, they need to buy the compost, they need to get it there, so they need to pay for freight, and then they need to apply the compost. And all of that has a significant cost, the biggest of which tends to be freight. After a couple of years of doing this, I would say I see the real world costs on average ranging from $50 to $100 per ton to the farmer for purchasing the compost, hauling it to their site, and spreading it. And that's just a kind of an anecdotal range. I've seen double, triple that costs, and rarely a little bit lower as well. Now, that's a high cost if we're talking about $75 or $100 per ton. And keep in mind, if you are looking to use compost on land within your jurisdiction, the dollars may be different, but you will have the same elements. You will have to haul and apply that compost as well. And there's a cost beyond just the cost of procuring or purchasing the material itself. So when you team up with Zero Foodprint, we're bringing a lot of sort of people to the table, and we also bring those dollars to the table. So in this example here, let's say Zero Foodprint would charge $40 per ton. That would be the cost to the jurisdiction. And if we're talking about a real world cost of $75 per ton, where do those dollars come from? Well, they'll come from a variety of sources. Either the farmer ranch may pay a portion, and in many cases, Zero Foodprint, through our grant program, also brings in a portion to cover some of those costs. We've been doing this for a number of years, and we continue to do this and actually expand our footprint primarily in California, but throughout the United States, actually. So as I said, we're primarily a climate organization, but this is, and so what we're doing throughout the US is providing these grants, and this is just another way, and a lot of the kind of mechanisms fit in very nicely. So we literally are keeping records that we normally keep. We are doing the actions that we keep and do anyway for many of our projects. And so this really is, in our wheelhouse. Next slide, please. So this is one of the tools, and I'll go over it very quickly, but I like the picture. Essentially, when you go to our map, you can put in your address and location and pop up the different CalRecycle approved facilities here. We'll provide a link to that at the end. Next slide, please. Our application slide for the farms and ranches is really important. We are very much a farm and ranch advocacy organization on top of our work with the climate. And so we aim to serve those folks as well. So we have a process online where it takes about 5 minutes. It's very fast and it's very easy for the farms and ranch. And this is statewide, but we provide it in English or Spanish, again, working to lower the bar to entry and making sure our program is accessible as possible to all farms and ranches throughout the state. Next slide, please. On the back end, what we do is we compile those requests, and they provide information to us about where they are, what they're looking for, where they want to procure or purchase the compost from, how much, when, etc., and if they're able to cost share at all. And you can see here, they're able to sort of indicate to us a general idea of their ability to cost share. And so we can prioritize based on available funding from Zero Foodprint in our grant program. We can prioritize based on location, cost efficiency for reducing freight, etc. We also keep track of what is here, practice standard compliance. And what that is the farmer ranch applying compost in a way that follows generally existing agricultural practice standards. And when they do, we're able to model the carbon benefit, the CO2 sequestration. Next slide, please. On the back end, again, what the jurisdiction gains access to is a portal. And this is, I won't say live, but let's say it's running, 10 to 15 days behind live projects. And you can see the name of a project, when it was completed. You get access to the invoices, the quantity procured. We provide information around the real world cost, modeled CO2, location, etc. So you can follow along essentially in near real time as to what's being done and how far along we are in our contract or what's been procured on your behalf. In addition to that, we provide annual reports that have all the documentation as well in essentially a PDF format, so that while it's great to have this live information, we all, sorry, I'm seeing the question, which I will answer in just a moment because it's a good question. We provide all the information to you to just have on file. If you like it, it is also here as well. Next slide, please. This is the tool that we use for modeling sequestration. It's called Compost. It was developed, as you can see at the top, in collaboration with the Colorado State University and USDA. This is the same tool that the California Department of Food and Agriculture uses. USDA also uses it. So, and we provide the reports from here as well. You don't have to worry about the dollars here. That is a separate program. But here's an example of a real compost project that we did and how we calculated the modeled sequestration. And this information is provided to you in that report as well. Next slide, please. So looking back, we have we started actually some pilots around this in 2021. And so since then, we have completed 4 pilot contracts. We've got over almost a dozen contracts right now with jurisdictions working in our most recent version of Compost Connector. So this is all historical, but to give perspective, we worked on 68 farm projects in 12 counties. We secured quite a few tons, and then again, sort of those value adds, we are in certain cases able to provide information about demographics. So we work a lot with socially disadvantaged farms. And then you can see here at the bottom, the sort of value to the climate, which is in this particular case, the equivalent of not burning over 325,000 gallons of gas. It's significant. And 1383 has the opportunity to play not just into a compliance role, but really be about climate action as well and serve sort of multiple purposes. We always look to provide value wherever we can. So thanks for that. Next slide, please. I'll leave this here, but I want to also add one thing, which is that in addition to the reporting that you see, we provide essentially an Excel sheet that is based on the electronic annual report. So you can take that information that you see in the portal and basically cut and paste it in a pretty easy way. So while Ron demonstrated all the steps that a jurisdiction would and should do if they are handling procurement on their own, a lot of that is something that we can take the burden off of a jurisdiction, especially a smaller jurisdiction that may not be able to handle hiring 1 or 2 staff to meet procurement requirements. I'll also clarify something really quick. I know I'm about to be at time before we move on, but yeah, there was a quick question about why 1 DSP contract, and I think that's a great question. I almost misspoke, so I apologize for that. We have 1 contract with a jurisdiction, and then what Zero Foodprint does is handles the paperwork with the farms and ranches on behalf of the jurisdiction, essentially turning all the farms and ranches that we work with into a direct service provider. There are also cases where Zero Foodprint is the purchaser of compost and uses compost ourselves. And in those cases, we would be a direct service provider, but you're correct that we handle the sort of sub DSP contracts as opposed to a single one with us. And now I'll pass it off to Michelle from Santa Clara County.
Okay, thanks so much. And really exciting stuff. Let's see, can you move to the next slide? It's in the same. There we go. Awesome. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to give a case study that we're working on with Zero Foodprint. So we can be tracking it, and happy to share any of the resources from any of the projects we're doing with those of you on the workshop. So very quickly, Santa Clara County is a non-JPA collection of 16 cities, including the city of San Jose, which is 50% of the county population-wise. So overall, the county cities need to buy about 155,000 tons of material. We also have very mature programs. So the cities throughout Santa Clara County have been working for 20 plus years to develop markets in agriculture, but also landscape applications in cities, compost giveaways, etc. So we are all the cities are applying multiple strategies. But because we've got this urban agriculture border, we want to do some more expansion of the program that Santa Clara County already had before 1383. So we're leveraging a grant program called the Agricultural Resiliency Program. And in that program, we grant about $200,000 per year to farms in Santa Clara County for grants up to $30,000. And very similarly to the stats that Leo shared, we're seeing over 80% of the grant applications are coming in for compost and mulch. And they have a choice of 26 climate-friendly actions that they can do in order to get the money. Another thing that has linked us for quite a while to Zero Foodprint is the parallel development of the program. So Zero Foodprint has been involved as we developed the ARI program. We use the Comet Planner and have very similar parallels in the way we function. So I'm gonna come back to the $200,000 in my next slide, my last slide. So if we can move on to the case study really quickly. So we have developed an agreement using our local assistance grant in addition to $10,000 of money that's coming from countywide funds that we collect from the landfill. Those are managed through our technical advisory committee. And so the county unincorporated is putting in $70,000 of their local assistance grant funding in order to build a compost connector program that can support all the county cities, even though we're not a JPA. So again, it gets a little more creative because we're going to invite cities to participate, but we're not managing it on behalf of all the cities. So Leo and I are going to get kind of creative on how we can make this compost connector available to the cities, because the opportunity we see here is to leverage funding from the grants that Leo talked about, crowdsource funding, and the public funding that jurisdictions have to spend in order to procure material for compliance. And we really want to leverage those things for local projects, right? So if you glanced at the projects that he had, you probably in that one screen, there's many more, but not a lot of Santa Clara County projects. So we'd like to take a bunch of those ARI projects and get expanded funding and support for them. So for 2023, for example, we got 42 applications for a total of $650,000, of which will support 200,000. So we've got a lot of projects that are on the ground, ready to go, farmers willing to subsidize part of the cost. So we'd like to leverage all of these activities to support more of our farms. And going back to the $200,000, we are really thrilled that $200,000 was put into the permanent budget on an ongoing, reoccurring annual general fund pot of money. So that money is not coming from ratepayers. It's coming from our, well, ultimately it is, but it's coming from our general fund. And that's because these projects in addition to the other things we're doing around the county, meet our climate action plans. So there's a great leverage there. It supports our farms in the county's goals for economic and the development of minority-owned businesses. So we have an agricultural plan that is leveraged here. And then there's a lot of focus, especially with recent floods, et cetera, on the ecosystem services of farmland. So when we took that $200,000 request to the board, 1383 was actually a subnote and saying we also get that compliance. But really the selling points are a lot of the things that Leo has talked about in terms of putting climate and economic development first. So these types of projects could have great saleability in terms of budgets, et cetera, and getting the kind of money that we're looking for here. So I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to invite you to come to Ray, and I'll be presenting more details on this project on Monday, August 14th at 2:15, and would love to talk to you more there and share all the resources that we've put together. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Leo. That was great. Super information. Love that you want to share and keep the conversations going. I love the thinking that you've got going outside of the box and connecting the dots and getting other folks involved. So the solutions that you're presenting sound really good. With that, I'm going to take us to our next speaker, Michael Wansidler, Program Manager for the Department of Public Works for the County of San Diego.
Thank you, Kathleen. And first off, I wanted to say that it's a privilege to listen to all these very knowledgeable fellow presenters. And also I want to acknowledge and thank CalRecycle staff for organizing this important discussion. So my presentation this afternoon will provide a sampling of some of the methods and programs that our jurisdiction and our region have implemented to address and work toward SB 1383 procurement goals, as well as just generally providing and building greater support for compost and mulch. Next slide, please. So as an overview of my presentation, I'll cover the challenge where I'll lay out the goal for our county and our region. I'll share opportunities and partnerships we've forged through our work. I'll share some outreach and tools and examples from San Diego County that might be helpful and you could consider for your jurisdiction. And last, as you've heard for the others, we'll take questions after all the presentations. Next slide, please. So as a way to illustrate the scale of the SB 1383 procurement challenge for our region, this slide that shows that for the entire San Diego County, approximately 268,000 tons of recovered organic waste will need to be purchased collectively by our 19 jurisdictions. And though they can choose to purchase one or a mix of organic waste products, in reality, there's very little available energy derived from organics that's available in our region. So at least initially, jurisdictions, most of them are going to be relying on purchasing compost and mulch to meet their targets. And so through this process, we've been collaborating with many jurisdictions and other industry stakeholders to work toward our targets. And I'll talk more about that through my presentation. Next slide, please. So internally for the county, for our jurisdiction, we know we'll need to purchase either 40,000 tons of mulch or 23,000 tons of compost or some mix thereof. So then we started to quantify how many acres would be needed to apply this material. So if we did an application rate of 1 inch of mulch, we'd need up to 1,200 acres approximately, or at 2 inches, about half that, with even less acres needed if compost is used. And we also reviewed how much land each of our departments had to help us target the promotion. And this is a ballpark. It includes their buildings and parking lots and others, but I think it helps us just to get an idea of those key departments we'll need to work with. And although simplistically, we could say, well, we'll just give it all to one department and make them responsible for it. The reality is we want the benefit as well as the costs to be spread out so that we recognize no single department, no single project are going to be a panacea where every purchase is going to help us work toward that goal. Next slide, please. So I want to just have everyone consider that this is a big lift for all of our jurisdictions and regions. And I don't think that we should go it alone. I think working together through forming a team and as many partnerships as you can consider will really help move this ball forward. And so internally, we've done that in our county by involving our public works department, our watershed, our waste sector, our park and recreation, purchasing, contracting, really trying to get the team as large as possible. And that extends beyond your internal jurisdiction, looking at other cities and others within the region that can work with you. That's been a big success, I think, for us to involve multiple players. We've also been partnering with our planning agency, Sandag, and they have multiple various committees that also have helped us spread the word and connect as partners in this, as well as local universities and colleges that have landscape design programs. There's been good involvement with them, as well as many resources from state agencies. Other industry folks are also key components to the team. We've got several knowledgeable operators that help spread the word, and also best management practices, and have been very involved and are integral partners. We've also partnered with our American Society for Landscape Architect group here and their association and members, as well as the various companies and architects that are part of those programs. Agriculture, there's, as Leo was mentioning, regenerative and sustainable agriculture are also really important allies. And so our cooperative extension, resource conservation districts, farm bureaus have also all been really valuable partners. And last but not least, the water quality, the water conservation side, there's a lot of overlap between what they're doing and the programs that we as managers of waste and recycling programs are focusing on. Next slide, please. As we are, is similar to others, realize that SB 1383 was dawning and that we needed viable end markets to support the creation of new processing facilities. We worked with a contractor, Hidden Resources, to complete a compost and mulch market analysis starting in 2018 and 2019, but completed in May of 2020. Next slide, please. To give you some context on organics in San Diego County, there's about 1.5 million tons of compostable materials that are landfilled annually. With SB 1383, all this material will need to be diverted from the landfill. And we estimate that when our diversion programs are mature, up to 4 million cubic yards of compost and mulch will be produced every year. Next slide, please. So where are we going to take it? And what's the market opportunity? Well, we did some surveys with industry members in 2018 and 19, and we saw that there was a significant opportunity in greater use of compost and mulch and erosion control and landscaping. At that time, the sales were estimated about 621,000 cubic yards per year. But with growing awareness of the benefits of using these products, as well as the new procurement requirements, we think the potential has to more than double to nearly get up to 1.5 million cubic yards per year. Next slide, please. So now we know some of the areas that we want to target, but who do we work with and how do we do this? Well, I mentioned our internal working group. So we meet with that team monthly. We share resources and trainings with them. We also work with them periodically to look at how much they've been reporting and tracking how they're tracking the material so that we can report accurately up to the state, know that we're meeting the goals. We've also been fortunate that they have been able to identify other trainings that they're holding that we can integrate within. So purchasing, contracting is a key one. And so we've been able to integrate our SB 1383 requirements into meetings with the contract managers, all those officer representatives, as well as purchase card holders, so that they can become knowledgeable and start to integrate these purchases when they're working through their programs. And also we have a lot of resources, and I'll go through those just kind of briefly in my following slides. Next slide, please. So one of the key ones is obviously we were required to adopt a policy or a contract or ordinance that is related to purchasing SB 1383 materials. And that's been really helpful to get that top-down support, because you want to get a hold of those that control the purse strings. And so that allows us to create a policy that requires future contracts to specify SB 1383 eligible products, as well as look at those large contracts that may need to be amended that are going to potentially purchase large amounts of material as well. Next slide, please. We've created a list of those vendors that are producing the SB 1383 eligible materials. That's always a perennial question. We want to get that information to folks as quickly and easily as possible. We are also in that vein creating a blanket purchase agreement that any county department can use to purchase compost and mulch and include the freight for that, so that it's easy for them. Many are using existing contracts or contractors or using purchase agreements, but we want to make sure it meets the SB 1383 standard. So this is the method we're working on. We're also creating it with the intent that it can be piggybacked by other local jurisdictions. And then as Ron was sharing earlier, these, I call them tip sheets, but spec sheets. It includes both the information on the products to be purchased, as well as some information too on how to apply it. And that's really been valuable. Next slide, please. Another aspect to this sharing of information and training is important for our departments, but it's also important for our industry members that we work with and contract with. And so we've created through our watershed programs and in partnership with our water authority, a sustainable landscapes guide that covers all that information, including the specs. An idea also that we've heard from other areas that I think we're thinking about is certifying landscapers. And I think what's notable is the model from CalRecycle-California, where they offer trainings and they also offer certification of professionals. And you can see on kind of the links down here, they'll be available for you to check out. Once the professionals have completed those trainings and become certified, then they promote them so that those folks are out there speccing compost for projects that they work on too. And there's a ton of other trainings that are available in best management practices. The links are available here from Caltrans and CalRecycle, and they'll help you get the word out. Next slide, please. And of course, through these meetings, we share how to use compost and talk about using socks around storm drains and on construction projects, and compost blankets to prevent erosion control. And I think it's important to note that these products sometimes can be more expensive upfront than the status quo of straw wattles, but they all outperform them in many instances and often cost less when you look at the project for the overall cost, the kind of life cycle of the project. Next slide, please. So when we provide case studies with that in mind, like this one that shows a contractor that's covering steep slopes with a compost blanket that's seeded with natives, we still describe the project, show the before and afters that wows everybody, and of course it shows the cost, but we also make a point to balance this out with showing the projected water savings and the carbon benefits through a life cycle calculator that quantifies those metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents that are saved and the dollar values of environmental and societal benefits. Next slide, please. And though, like everybody on this call today, we can talk compost all day long, but it's important to get out into the field, especially for folks that haven't seen these or are new to this field, to let them see projects on the ground. And so just as an example of this, we partnered with one of the companies that did our trolley extension, the Mid-Coast Transit Connectors, and we showcased compost and mulch best management practices on their programs and invited members of the planning committees from our local transit agency, from SANDAG, from local jurisdictions, and the environmental managers, watershed landscape designers, all those practitioners, and even elected officials that came out, and all in the concept to expand the awareness of use of these materials and stimulate broader use. And so, of course, there's plenty of folks that weren't able to attend to, so we posted a video and got a link here for you to check it out to help tell that story. Next slide, please. We've also been able to partner with our cooperative extension, UC Cooperative Extension. That's they've worked with our resource conservation districts and some of the compost facility operators and other industry members, and they've done some demo days of equipment on how the materials can be spread, and also just taking a chance to showcase those materials, and that's helped stimulate greater agricultural use in our region. Next slide, please. And if you're not already involved with the food systems work, we have a food system initiative. I encourage you to do so. We've been talking for many years about the importance of soils and compost, and now we've got a lot of fellow departments that are also advocates. And so now that they're knowledgeable on the benefits, when there are funding opportunities that become available, they're willing to partner on grants or willing to partner on efforts. And so to that end, we've received funding from our Health and Human Services Agency under the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, their community food production program. And so that's funding compost and mulch giveaways that we're doing for community gardens and school gardens, and also to the public over the next couple of years. And so these kind of events can help you also generate a lot of good press when we're trying to promote SB 1383, especially if you can get an elected official out there. And lastly, those funds can also go to farms, and I'm going to talk more about those on the next slide. Next slide, please. So you've heard of the discussion about regenerative agriculture, and many have heard about the Marine Carbon Project and the Healthy Soils Initiative, and that benefit of compost increasing soil's ability to hold carbon and increase our climate resilience. And so we really see this as a next frontier. I want to model similarly to the County of Santa Clara, what they're doing. I think there's great opportunities for expanding markets in these areas. And as jurisdictions, as was mentioned, there's opportunities to connect this with our climate action plans and incentivize farmers to practice this regenerative agriculture or carbon farming. So our Board of Supervisors have directed our staff to develop incentives to encourage carbon farming and actually fund some projects. And so we're working toward that end. Next slide, please. And lastly, we've been engaged with our colleagues at the American Society of Landscape Architects and are considering a design competition for compost and mulch. And essentially, this is a way to just another platform and strategy to promote best management practices. And there's a great toolkit that CalRecycle has developed. We want to get that in the hands of the practitioners, the landscape designers, and we want to showcase what they're doing. Both the young folks that are new to the field, as well as those established landscape designers, to show us their best and do it and replicate those BMPs in our region. Next slide, please. All right, that concludes my presentation. I hope some of these examples will be useful in your work, and I'll be available for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's wonderful. I really appreciate the competition. That's a fun way to take what we have available there with the toolkit and getting it, out there a little bit more. Wonderful information. Yeah, I anticipate a few questions there in the end. With that, I'm going to come over to Kimberly Cook, our final presenter, who's the Central and Northern California Business Development Manager for Agromin. Following Kimberly will be brief comments by Ariana Rabago, the Environmental Specialist for the Public Works Department, City of Ventura. All you, Kimberly.
Thanks, Kathleen. And thanks to CalRecycle for hosting the webinar today. I appreciate having the opportunity to connect with everybody. So today I'll talk about how Agromin supports jurisdictions with SB 1383 procurement solutions. We'll start with understanding a little bit about Agromin as a company, and then transition into our procurement website that was designed specifically for procurement for jurisdictions. We'll pivot a little bit into understanding the importance of soil health, and then how that relates to our carbon farming projects, which create a variety of opportunities for jurisdictions to be part of great programs throughout the state. Next slide. Agromin's been a family-owned and operated company since 1972. We're headquartered in Ventura County and have over 200 employees operating in 15 counties throughout the state. We manage over 1.2 million tons of organic waste annually and serve more than 200 communities throughout California by recycling organic waste into more than 300 different eco-friendly products that go back out to the communities. Next slide. So this slide is a little bit old. It shows our footprint throughout the state of California, in North, Central, and Southern California. We've had several of these facilities that are the new facilities and planning that have come online, and we have many more facilities we're bringing online this year and next year as well. Next slide. So we operate in a true circular economy, meaning that we take organic waste via the waste haulers in municipalities. We compost this into high quality soil products. It goes back out to the community and agriculture, and then the process starts again with the collection of the organics. Next slide. So let's talk about 1383 procurement. Next slide. And next slide. So last year, we launched our CaliforniaCompost.net website, and this was designed exclusively for jurisdictions for procurement to help them meet their procurement requirements. Next slide. On the website, you'll find a variety of resources. There's a listing of qualified products for 1383, an explanation about the brokering services, and then we have analysis that we provide for jurisdictions. Next slide. Also, you'll find a procurement summary. So you can type in your jurisdiction. In this case, it's the city of Oxnard, and it will show you if you were to procure 100% of one of these categories, for example, compost. If City of Oxnard wanted to procure 100% of their procurement tons in compost, they'd need to procure 2,849 tons, and so on. Now, we don't provide the bioenergy or the RNG, but we provide it there as a resource so you have an idea of what each of those categories are. Next slide. And as part of the procurement portal, each jurisdiction that works with us has a portal and a login that's specific to their jurisdiction. On that portal, they can do a number of things. They can go to purchase qualifying products like compost and mulch and submit their orders directly through the website, and then they're delivered to wherever they're requesting. Separately, for the brokering services that we offer, as well as when jurisdictions order directly through the website, everything is housed on the portal. So all of the invoices and the compost analytics and anything else that's required for the CalRecycle reporting at the end of the year is housed either on the portal or provided in a quarterly report. And so these quarterly reports also encompass the work that was done for that jurisdiction during that quarter, and then provide additional information like the impact that their compost use or procurement has on the environment. And then there's a picture here. It shows how far along that jurisdiction is with their total procurement for the year based on that quarter. And back one slide. And so with that, when it comes to the procurement for each different jurisdiction, there's a number of different options. And to be honest, it's always best to start with a conversation between myself or one of my Agromin colleagues and the jurisdiction to understand what your needs are based on your situation and your location and the amount of compost or composted mulch products that you're looking to procure. So for example, if a city or county has an interest to use it on their parks and medians inside their jurisdiction, that's a conversation we can have and talk through what that would look like with our procurement services. If they're interested to have it go to agriculture within their jurisdiction, that's a conversation. If they're interested, if it doesn't matter, not using it, looking to use it on the parks, or no need to use it within the jurisdiction. If there's an interest to maybe one of the less expensive solutions to just have it moved for procurement on their behalf outside of the jurisdiction, going out to agriculture, then that's a conversation as well. And so then once I understand what the particular needs are for that jurisdiction, then I can put together a program and solutions that would be of particular interest to that city or county. So in those form of brokering agreements, we have an agreement between Agromin and that jurisdiction to then provide the procurement brokering solutions, and then we'll move the compost or mulch to agriculture or to a land restoration project or to wherever it is that we've agreed upon in that agreement. And then as Agromin, I have a standard one-page agreement between the jurisdiction and then the direct service provider, as in the farmer or rancher or the end user. And so that end user, or let's say farmer, is using that compost on behalf of that jurisdiction. And so then that document also goes in the portal and is part of the procurement reporting paperwork that's provided. Now, separately, we also, Agromin's not a waste hauler, but we work with many of the large waste haulers throughout the state of California to market their products or move their material out to agriculture, landscape, or various things. So we have, we're just launching kind of a new program that we're getting off the ground that I won't speak to in much depth here, but I'll give you a high level understanding. And then if it sounds of interest, then this would be a great conversation for us to have offline. So we have multifaceted software platforms that provide both haulers and jurisdictions multiple ways to meet 1383 procurement requirements of compost and mulch. So if you're a waste hauler that might be interested to have us market your soil products through one of our software platforms, or if you're a jurisdiction that might be interested to procure compost or mulch via one of your waste haulers through our software platform, reach out so we can set up that call to talk through different ideas and solutions, and so we can explain more of what that program is. And Ventura is one of the jurisdictions that's utilizing our software platform for one of our programs, and Ariana will speak a bit about that later. Next slide. Agromin understands that improving the health of the soil is important to slow the process of climate change. Next slide. And specifically, according to scientists and climate experts, the most practical and scalable natural solution for removing carbon from the atmosphere is the soil beneath our feet. Next slide. You can see on the left side versus the right side of this slide, the left side shows rangelands that are depleted of soil organic matter. Carbon is not is easily held in the soil. Water doesn't infiltrate as easily. It's not held in the soil as easily, and there's less fungal and microbial activity in the root system, which is important for the growth of the plant. Whereas on the right side, compost added to the soil adds that soil, that carbon back to the soil, allows carbon to be sequestered in the soil, and improves the water infiltration and holding capacity, which builds stronger plants. Next slide. And so because of this, and with the understanding about how important improving the quality of the soil is to our environment here in the state, we've partnered with a variety of agricultural partners and different nonprofits and organizations to restore land and improve the health. Next slide. And I'll share those with you. Limonare is one of our inaugural projects. We've been there for many years. Next slide. They're a large lemon grower in Southern California. We applied compost to, we have a PhD soil scientist on the team that does a variety of research at all these carbon farming projects for us. And so here you can see compost was applied in the picture on the left, and after a single rain, the picture on the left is showing new flushes, growth, whereas the picture on the right is not. So even a single application of compost, you'll see on these slides, makes a difference. Next slide. This is our Bulls Farming Compost Center. Next slide. And this is a plot of land at the Bulls Farming site that was fallowed for several years. And so our scientist has put together this research project where he's applying different sizes of compost, sometimes compost with biochar, and then is studying the results of compost application over a period of time and the growth then to bring this soil back to life. Next slide. This is our carbon farming project in Sacramento. This is the Van Vleck Ranch. You'll see this was a single application, 8 to 10 tons per acre of compost last October. We had a rain in October, and then after that first rain, you'll see everything that's green on the screen was where we applied compost once, and then it rained. And then on the outskirts, you'll see the brown area, and that's the area that did not have compost application. So that's a meaningful difference to that rangeland with a single application. Next slide. This is Montalvo Park in Ventura. The before slide shows what the park looked like, and we worked with them on this project to improve and try to restore this park. So less than a year later, we took another picture, and you can see the before and after with the percent of soil carbon in the soil increased from 4.5% to 5.1%. So a noticeable difference in a short time period. Next slide. And this will be coming online in 2024. This is our Yolo Solano carbon farming project. This is at the Yolo Land and Cattle Company. It'll be similar to the Sacramento carbon project, where we're moving compost there and studying the results. Next slide. And then finally, these are the purpose of these different carbon farming projects. And in this case, these are different nonprofits and land restoration organizations and universities that we've partnered with to do a variety of projects to restore land and improve soil health. And so between the carbon farming projects and these organizations, these are all opportunities for jurisdictions to have their 1383 procurement funding channeled towards any of these projects to be part of something meaningful throughout the state with their procurement dollars. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And now we have some comments from Ariana Rabago.
Hi, y'all. My name is Ariana Rabago with the City of Ventura. I actually don't have slides. This is just going to be a little bit more of a quick chat with you all. So you can either put my face up or we can leave the slide here too. Doesn't matter. But yeah, I was asked to give a couple comments about our newest procurement program, which is the free compost and mulch program for our residents. The program is a partnership with organic waste recycler Agromin. Not quite the same type of program that Kimberly was just speaking to, but we do utilize their website, as she mentioned. And the program involves providing free mulch and compost to our residents, available through three main methods. The first being pickup at one of our community gardens. So we have a stockpile there that residents who maybe want a smaller quantity can come and pick up, and have a vehicle available can come pick up material. The second option is to pick up directly at Agromin's facility in our neighboring city of Oxnard. It does have a minimum pickup amount, so it's more so for larger quantity users that also have a vehicle to hold that amount of material. And the third option is for Agromin to deliver direct to residents with city zip codes. And this option requires the resident to cover their own shipping costs, which is a preset rate of $135 per order. And both of the options involving pickup or delivery from Agromin's facility require the resident to make an online order through the Agromin website and input a coupon code. We did run a pilot program over the winter, which was marketed to just our compost event attendees to kind of work out the kinks of the program and then preliminarily evaluate community interest. And that pilot was a success. So we've expanded the program to all residents just last month, fairly new. And we've set rates and procedures via an agreement with Agromin. We're going to use SB 1383 grant funds to pay for this program. And we don't currently have a cap or a limit to the number of folks that can participate, but we also don't have unlimited funds. So that will be a little bit more flexible and fluid as we evaluate program use over time, make sure we're not allowing, more participation than we can afford. But right now we seem to be in a comfortable range with the amount of use we're getting now. So going to keep monitoring that. And many of our program details are available on our website, which is www.cityofventura.ca.gov/ES. You can find our webpage full of this information. And I'm happy to share our agreement we have with Agromin or any other resources you might find helpful. You can also connect with me via email. I'm not sure the best place for me to place my email, maybe the Q&A or the chat, but I will do so right now. Thank you all for listening and having me.
Thank you, Ariana. And thank you to all of our speakers. Let's go to next slide. Now we come to the part of our webinar where everybody gets to ask questions of the speakers and perhaps even the commenters. And I know we've got some Q&A going there. I'm gonna
Yes, we have some questions that have been coming in. First off, I'm going to go ahead and just read off the questions that have been answered in the Q&A portion. So first, we have a question that came in from Christy Holbert, who asks for 661, will jurisdictions need to update their ordinances to reflect new percentages? The answer is, it depends on what is in your ordinance and what is referenced. For example, if you refer to 14 CCR section 18993.2a, then no change would be needed. To provide context, the SB 1383 regulations in 14 CCR section 18993.2a references sections 22-150 through 22-154 of the Public Contract Code. PCC section 22153 references PCC section 12209. I think they're a bit nested. AB 661, effective in 2023, repealed section 12209 of the Public Contract Code and replaces it with specific post-consumer recycled content levels for certain paper products, including janitorial papers, and provides a process for updating the post-consumer recycled content levels for paper products going forward. Jennifer Gilbert asks, when Ron Alexander is talking about looking at bid specs and updating them to include organic waste products, is that required by SB 1383 or just a way to meet the procurement requirements? The answer to that is, this is a way to meet the procurement target, but is not required. We're just sharing ideas on what jurisdictions can do. Next up is a question from Jennifer Halpin. This isn't necessarily a question that needs to be answered on here. This presentation has just reminded me of a convo with our local ag commissioner's office where they stated they would like to know when large quantities of compost are being applied to farmlands, because they stated that there are some unintended side effects that can come from applying compost with origins that are out of their own county. Has CalRecycle had talks with the state ag commissioner's office about the application of large amounts of compost on farmlands and public areas near farms? To hear back from their office. Kara Morgan replied, we will need to circle to our own team in the Star Branch to respond to your question. We will get back to you. I am going to skip that one for right now. Christine Williamson asked, I see that erosion control and slope dressing was mentioned multiple times as an optional use. Can it be used at landfills? Not alternative daily cover. The regulations do not prohibit such a use. Compost has many benefits for erosion control, etc. The recovered organic waste products must also meet the requirements in the regulations to count towards the target. And table that one for a second as well. Serena Lee asks, are the compost facilities on compost.ag SB 1383 compliant? Leo Beckerman replies, all the facilities on compost.ag and www.zerofoodprint.org/SB 1383 meet the SB 1383 facility qualifications to provide compliant material. Please note, it does not necessarily mean that any and all material from the listed is compliant.
I think we're ready to go to some unanswered questions now.
All right, sounds good.
All right, our first is from Robin Nelson. Robin asked, is it possible for local businesses to purchase compost mulch from an approved distributor and have that go toward overall procurement requirements?
Robin, you should be able to unmute and ask your question, please.
Hi, I think it was pretty much covered in the presentation. So I was just curious as to whether residents or anyone else going to a facility and purchasing compost, if noted when they make the purchase, can that go towards the city's procurement target?
Okay,
Thank
Kathy,
you. I'll start. Hey, thank you so much for that question. There's a few caveats to it, and I think you probably saw this in the presentation. The key is the regulations allow for a direct service provider agreement. So anyone can procure, purchase, use, give away material on behalf of the city, but there has to be that direct service provider agreement in place prospectively. So there are a lot of creativity in that space. Michelle spoke to it. Leo spoke to it. Kimberly spoke to it, that you need to have the direct service provider agreement in place first. And then any entity who is willing to be a direct service provider can procure on behalf. So there's a lot of creativity going on with jurisdictions. I think you heard, for example, with Leo, they've been able to establish with some of the farms that want to procure, are procuring compost, a willingness to be a direct service provider for a jurisdiction so that that can count towards their target. We also, if you ever need it, we have some sample language. If you want to implement a direct service provider agreement, we can email those. Just contact your local assistance liaison and we can send you some of those examples. The language is very simple, but just the regs lay out that it must be a written contract or agreement. So it has to be something in writing. So did that help answer the question? Or add to what you heard in the webinar?
oh, sorry, I think she may have muted again. Let me find one more time to unmute us.
Okay. Yes, that did answer. What I was thinking about is we are a small city and we do have a business here that it's Galt Rock and they sell mulch and compost and things like that. And I was just worried about the impact that the city giving away free compost would have on such a business. And so I thought, well, maybe if they could go purchase from one of these facilities, whatever product they would sell at their location, but purchase it on behalf of, the city so that it's going towards our target.
Yeah, and we may want to do a follow-up conversation with your specific scenario. If I understand that scenario correctly, I forget what you call it, Galt Rock?
Galt Rock,
yeah,
yes.
Galt Rock. Would Galt Rock then be selling it to someone else?
So,
or using it?
They would be selling it.
Okay, so the hitch in the direct service provider agreement is that the direct service provider, DSP we call it, agreement needs to be with the end user of the material. So what could happen, and this is kind of what Agromin does, well, not kind of, it is what they do as part of their offerings, is you could have Galt Rock, if they have customers, right, that buy compost or mulch that meets the regulatory requirements, they could get that entity that purchases from them to be a direct service provider to the city. And so that paperwork would be there. And then they could be that middle person and provide the records back to the city. But the entity that signs the direct service provider agreement is the entity that's buying it from Galt Rock. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah.
It may require some follow-up conversation with us, but
yeah.
That was my first thought, is the impact it's going to have on them. So
yeah, and I appreciate you thinking of that. I think that is really important, but it could also have a really positive impact as well. So happy to explore that further with you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Leo, did you want to add in on that one?
Yeah, I want to say I definitely appreciate the kind of open market consideration with that. It is potentially a major issue, and I can I know that, Kimberly and my program both sort of factor that in, working in Kimberly's case, obviously, as a composter and compost producer and vendor, in our case, working really hand in hand with those vendors as partners. So I do really appreciate the question. I think it is really important because sort of flooding the market, if you will, with jurisdiction procured compost would not help anybody. And I think we would see a lot of problems for more people than just those involved in the immediate 1383 procurement elements.
Thank you.
All right, our next question is from Jack Steinman. Jack, you should be able to unmute. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question.
Hey, thank you. This is Jack Steinman. Can you all hear me all right? Okay, I'm seeing a head nod from Leo. Thank you. I'm with the County of San Mateo's Office of Sustainability, and my team, we've spent the last few years really investing in trying to create programs that help us procure compost, of course, but also what we think is the intention of this procurement requirement. Gives us a reason to invest in improving the quality of it, improving the market that's already there. So we're investing in technical assistance to help create new compost users along the San Mateo County coast. We're also kicking off a compost contamination minimization campaign because one of the challenges with municipal compost is the contamination. No one's, I don't think that's foreign to many. So we're putting these investments into these programs that benefit the market, but that specifically that technical assistance to create new users and that investment in cleaning the feedstocks, that doesn't count towards our procurement target. So I'm also starting to hear of examples of jurisdictions finding maybe one or two really large ag producers that use large quantities of compost and simply just creating a direct service provider agreement with one or two folks, essentially subsidizing the compost outright. And that meets their procurement goals. So I'm just looking into the future, and I could see that becoming more of a trend, and investments into technical assistance or outreach falling behind in the name of compliance with regulations. So I'm really interested to hear more and learn how CalRecycle intends to enforce this procurement requirement. Are we only looking at tons procured, or maybe investments in programs that aren't directly procurement related? Understanding this is going to be really important for my team to plan out our programs in the future. Thanks.
Yeah. Hey, Jack, thank you for those questions. Very thoughtful questions. And I appreciate where you're coming from. We are somewhat limited in respect to how the regulations are constructed. And the target is specifically built off of, procuring certain products, organic waste, recovered products. We're just beginning to conduct, and I'm not sure if Ashley's available to jump on. She was stuck in another meeting, but we're just beginning compliance evaluations, just at the very beginning stages. So it's a bit early for me to speak to how something like that you provided would be taken into account. Now, I think if you were also doing kind of a bunch of other procurement activities and you hadn't quite met your target, and yet you were doing these other important aspects of education, et cetera, we certainly do have enforcement discretion to consider a variety of factors. So I think, to just look at it as a hypothetical is a little bit difficult for me, because when we're doing an evaluation, we're looking at all of the requirements and how you are implementing those requirements. With that said, I do want to reiterate that with the 1383 local assistant grant funding, one of the things we were looking for using that funding for is to do some of the things that you laid out. So that is definitely, while it doesn't necessarily help you with your target, it is in a way that you can use those funds to help support those important activities of contamination minimization and educating compost users. So not entirely able to answer your scenario question, but I think, again, as we're doing compliance evaluations, we would be looking at kind of the whole picture as it relates to what you've done and what you are doing towards the procurement target. Does that help, Jack?
It does. And to be fair too, I was really just trying to highlight a consideration. It may be a little provocative because I'm just
always are, Jack.
but I'm just considering. Well, it's Leo said something that resonated with me about flooding the market with jurisdiction funded compost isn't necessarily going to help everyone, and there's some big targets to fill. So maybe especially for dense urban areas, focusing on the quality of their feedstock could be more beneficial overall. So. But thank you, Kara.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the comments.
Thank you, Jack. If you didn't already see in the messages, Ron would love to connect with you. And so he left his contact information there to go ahead and continue that conversation.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
Next up, we have Tammy Solzenheiler. Tammy, you're unmuted on our end.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Stolzenthaler. I'm with the City of Watsonville Public Works and Utilities Department. And my question is, if the chip and grind from commercial green waste, is this 1383 compliant? And where can I get more information on this?
Hey, Tammy, thank you so much for that question. So a great place to go to start with answering your question is to the 1383 website. And first of all, if you go to the FAQ and you click on procurement and expand that down, there are two Q&As that will get you started. One Q&A is asks if a jurisdiction chips green material on site at its parks, would that mulch product be eligible to use towards its procurement target? And the response goes to explain that mulch can only count if it meets the regulatory requirements in sections 18993.1 F4. And basically that requires mulch to be produced at specific permitted authorized solid waste facilities or operations, and then has to comply with land application standards. And then following that question is another question about why can't mulch derived from chipping and grinding facilities or operations count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? And there's some additional guidance there. Additionally, on the 1383 page, if you go to the procurement page, so if you go to the main 1383 page, and if you scroll down about halfway down the page, you will see the procurement let's see if I can get there. The procurement header. It is the section of it. It's actually closer to the top third of the page. The header is procurement requirements using recycled organics products. And if you click on the learn more box, that page gives you really great, easy to digest information about what is required for counting mulch towards your target. So if you look at those and you still have questions, please feel free to reach out to your local assistance liaison, and we can get a follow-up set up with you. That help, Tammy?
Oh, yes, that helps. Thank you for answering. I'll be sure to look that up and get my answers online.
You bet. And we can do a follow-up if you have, just shoot an email and we can answer any follow-up questions.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, up next, we have two questions actually from April Hamud. April, you should be able to unmute now. Please tell us your name and affiliation and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is April Hamud from HF&H Consultants. We work with jurisdictions on their solid waste contracts. And I had two questions for CalRecycle and other jurisdictions. Have any jurisdictions worked with Caltrans for their compost mulch projects within their jurisdiction and have tracked the tonnage to count towards their jurisdiction's SB 1383 ROWP procurement credit? I've tried to contact I've tried to contact Caltrans on this question and they haven't been responsive. So I wanted to ask the audience about that. And then my second question is, as jurisdictions apply compost to public areas like parks, is there a time frame where the parks will need to be closed after applying that compost? If so, for how long?
Looks like the question was specifically asking about Montalvo Park. So if maybe Agromin or City of Ventura can speak to that.
Yeah, April, that is a great question. And I don't know the answer for Montalvo Park. That's I operate in Central and Northern California. That was in Southern California. And I also don't know what the regulation is for a publicly owned park after compost is applied, if the rules are different per jurisdiction or if it's the same. So
I just have a quick anecdotal answer to that because I was only marginally involved when that was going on. We did have to close it for a period, or at least it was more useful when we shut down the portion of the park where the compost was applied. I don't remember the specifics of how long or if there were requirements around that. I do know that at one point, like in the early days, we might have forgotten to close it or there was a miscommunication and that did impact the success of the application. So yeah, I think does need to be closed, not sure on the details.
April, if you want to shoot me an email directly, I can get a much better answer for you from my team that was involved in that.
Can I ask what kind of application it was for compost?
At Montalvo Park?
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't have all the specifics of that. Our PhD soil scientist does that research, so that was something he put together. So it wasn't. My understanding is it was not more than 10 tons per acre because that's a little too thick for the park area. But same thing, I can follow up with you with more information as well.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to understand it. Is this a new ball field being created? Are they gardens? Is it top dressing? It's typically the application. There's not going to be a health related issue to having people go in there. But if you're starting young plants or grass, you need to keep people off until you get them established. But that's a whole separate story. The key when you're applying compost, if you're putting it on a ball field with a top dress, because that's a big concern about keeping kids off the fields, is make sure you water it in to get it off the leaves and onto the surface of the ground. And hopefully it's drug into core aerification holes so it gets in the ground instead of on the ground. And you won't have as much negativity of it getting on a lot of clothing and things like that. So I hope that helps.
Thank you all. It looks like in the chat feature, we have Matthew Cotton, who's worked with Caltrans for decades now. So Matthew, if you'd like to contribute to the conversation, we can go ahead and unmute you.
Sure, guys, thanks. I think it was clear from the comment that Ron especially has worked with Caltrans and many DOTs around the country for literally decades. But specifically, Ron, Michelle, and I, and lots of other people at Caltrans have worked since around 95 to get Caltrans to use compost. That's increased from about 1% statewide to something like 5% now. But I was just trying to get to April's question, which is whether you could use Caltrans as a DSP, and you could and you should if there's a project in your area. But as Ron and Michelle and I and others would tell you, it's not always Caltrans directly buying that compost. They might be writing a spec. And again, Ron's done amazing work developing those specs. They're on the CalRecycle website. They're on the Caltrans website. They're a great resource for people wanting to get more of those type of applications done. But if you're trying to get credit for procurement credit for compost sold to Caltrans, it may be, again, well worth doing, but it may be more complicated than you think, because there's going to be 1 or 2 contractors or 3 contractors responding to Caltrans RFP. So it's not as simple as it would look on the surface, but still well worth doing. That's all I want to say.
Hey, Ray, while we have Matt and Ron available, could we jump to Alexander's question about testing results for PFAS? In case they have an answer.
Sure. Alexander Soulard. I'll go ahead and read it for you, Matthew. Are any of the presenters aware of any testing results for PFAS or compost derived from materials from an HDOWP facility?
What is an HOWP facility?
HDOWP. Let me go ahead.
It's a high diversion organic waste processing facility, meaning where material has been commingled, trash, organics, etc., and processed.
Right. Well, thus far, there is data out there. It's not being shared very widely. There have been papers and such. What we know thus far, if you look at compost, is typically PFAS and the related constituents are highest in biosolids and second highest in food compost. That post-consumer, where a lot of packaging has impacted that material because PFAS related materials are in there, and the lowest would typically be yard trimmings. I'm not going to mention any numbers. I know some numbers, but I don't want to misquote them.
Ron, maybe I can jump in because, as you know, the USCC just did a webinar on this, got some really great stuff from Dr. Ian Pepper at the University of Arizona, from Andrew, my good friend Andrew in Maine.
Carpenter.
Carpenter, thank you, Ron, and as well as other folks. So we've been looking at this very hard. There isn't much California data, although I can tell you the number, there are the scant numbers in California. Again, Ron's correct that the higher numbers are in biosolids, and the higher numbers are in biosolids that don't come from treatment plants with a lot of good pre-treatment, which California has and other states don't. So I would expect our numbers to be lower. But that said, you know, if you look for PFAS on this planet, you're going to find it. It's in rainwater. You know, composting can be seen as a sink for these larger societal problems. So yeah, if you search for it, you're going to find it. You're going to find it at landfills and leachate. You're going to find it at the wastewater treatment plant. Probably going to find it in compost. There's so much we don't know. I think the crux of that webinar, all of which the 3 presentations and the recording are available on the U.S. Composting Council website. I can put the link in the chat. The crux is there's just a lot we don't know. I think it was Mr. Staley from ERF who said that, despite a lot of work that's been done, a lot of work going on. Saw a great presentation in Australia this summer by a PhD over there. But ultimately, it's incredibly and frighteningly ubiquitous. So there's not a lot. Even if we did identify it in compost, there wouldn't be a whole heck of a lot we could do to change that. So that's not a great answer, but that's about the state of the art. But do check out, if you want more information, there's 3 great presentations on the U.S. Composting Council website of sort of the up-to-date where we're at the moment.
And let me just one really quick thing. I'll let everybody just, if they want to move on. The studies that have been done on in industries, like looking at biosolids and such, the numbers are going down. The products that were actually pulled from the market, we already see the numbers going down in the environment. So We may have to live with some of that, obviously, but Matt's right. It's the industrial sources that are more problematic than the residential sources of material. But the question is going to be these precursor products that are all over the place, and they're not being limited at this point. So the spigot has not turned off for a bunch of these materials, sadly.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that question, I just in these facilities there is it's basically, you know, it's garbage that's being sorted out of the compost material. So there's things like diapers, nonstick materials in there, all sorts of stuff. So I just was thinking it might be a much higher source in that compost than in other, you know, green waste or food waste combined compost. So I was just saying it might be a good thing to try testing moving forward. So just in case it has much higher numbers.
I would assume that it would, but I would not point my finger as anybody without data, but logic would say it would. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have a question, or two questions actually, from Jeffrey Harmon. Jeffrey, I'm going to unmute you. If you could please state your name and affiliation and then ask your questions.
Hi, I'm Jeff Harmon from Greenleaf Power. And I was just curious, the focus today, the conversation has been primarily on compost and mulch, and wanted to just kind of throw it out to the audience. I heard one of the presenters talk about the limited availability of the energy products, the RNG and biomass to electricity, as potential procurement options, and was curious, since my company does supply one of those products, was curious if any jurisdictions had any success in securing any of the energy products alongside their compost and mulch procurements. And then just the follow up to that is the website, the CalRecycle website, where you could look up the compost facilities, was shared. I wasn't sure if the energy product suppliers are also on that same website and would come up on that same search, or is that something, a different place that jurisdictions would have to look on the website, or how that would work?
Well, I'll just speak real quick. The existing website for the compost that is both compost.ag and zerofoodprint.org/SB1383. We work exclusively with Compost. We're an unaffiliated nonprofit, so that came sort of privately from us. I encourage it to be done. It would be great, but those websites will not be putting up any compliant facilities outside of the composting industry.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Leo, hey, Jeffrey, thank you. And thank you for all that you're doing in this space. I will repost the Q&A that talks about biomass facilities. I think for renewable natural gas derived from organic waste, I don't know that we posted a link. So probably the best link would be to our solid waste information system database to look up the in-vessel digestion facilities in California that are operating. So did that help answer the question? And I will go ahead and put that out there for everyone.
Clara, this is Chris. Just really quick. Remember we worked with Frederick to get that list up on the biomass page.
For biomass, yes. But RNG, I mean the in-vessel digestion facilities, I don't think we put a list up.
We just have the list for biomass up.
Yeah, you would get that from our Swiss system.
Great, thank you, Karen.
Yeah, you bet. I'll do it right now.
Next, we have Mariah Hill. Mariah, you are unmuted on our end. If you could go ahead and state your name and affiliation and ask your question regarding establishing DSPs.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Mariah Hill. I'm with the City of Modesto Solid Waste Division. I am just wondering, we're having a little bit of difficulty getting all of our vendors to sign the DSV agreements. And we're still selling the compost, which we are operating a compost facility. And so that's counting towards our procurement if they sign the DSV agreements. I'm just wondering if there's any ways that you can give us some advice on addressing some of those barriers. Some of our groups are saying that they don't want to sign it because they grow things that they don't want people to know about, or they have concerns about like migrant workers or something like that, just issues where they're really reluctant to put their company name on an agreement like that.
Yeah, hey, thank you so much. Do we have any jurisdictions that want to share how I know Leo probably has some tips on how you've dealt with direct service providers and encouraging them to be a direct service provider.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on it, but I think it is a sort of jurisdiction specific. So I'll give up the floor. And if nobody has something, I'm happy to step in.
I mean, I would just say in our case, we haven't had that pushback. So we've changed all of our county contracts with our landscape contractors, and they have an exhibit that says the material has to be compliant, and they have to in their contract they're signing a direct service provider agreement, and we have direct service provider agreements with every farm that receives money from us. So we haven't really seen pushback on the agreements themselves, but it could be different because we're granting them money, but we just haven't seen that barrier yet. So I'm kind of interested in what you have to say. So I'll have to see if we come up with that.
Yeah, and I'll bring in, I think in general, what we have seen is that there are definitely folks who are not interested in signing contracts, without a doubt. And what Zero Foodprint has done and seen is, one, we are just very upfront in clear language. While the direct service provider contract is in sort of legalese, we have made pretty aggressive sort of overtures to make it as clear as possible, and quite frankly, as short as possible. And giving them specifically what will be in the public record. So what information we collect and what will then be given over to a jurisdiction and in the public record. In my experience, what I have seen is we have people who kind of under no circumstances will sign a contract, and then others when I'd say the price is right. So when you get to, you'll get 1%, 5% off the cost of your compost, people are generally not interested. When the reimbursement or the value goes up to them, I see more people essentially line up to sign a contract.
And I would mirror that. If they're going to get a discount on the compost, then there's incentive to sign paperwork. I've had a couple of those talks. They want to know, is somebody going to come, and come on their farm and kind of that sort of thing. And so that's where I'll have to kind of explain and talk that through. But I think that's where I don't know if they sign that agreement, if they get something in return like a discount, because if there's not, then there may not be an incentive for them to sign paperwork.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, I think we are just about out of time for questions. But thank you all for being on. If we did not get to your question, please go ahead and send it to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. We will get back to you in as timely a manner as possible and connect you with the proper parties. Next slide, Darren. Okay, so a bit of a change up. Our next would-be webinar in July has been postponed until August to better meet the needs of stakeholders, local education agencies, and everybody that we want to have involved. But in the meantime, again, please go ahead and use that inbox and we'll be sure to get back to you. If there aren't any final comments from Kara, we can go ahead and close out the session.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. In closing, I would just like to thank everyone. You know, we have come so far when it comes to the procurement requirements. And I am so proud of our presenters and all that they shared. And what I'm hearing across the state with jurisdictions really working on their procurement requirements. And I know it's not an easy, well, nothing is easy in these regulations, but I know procurement is challenging. And I'm just so appreciative of just the creativity, the work that's being put into it. And, you know, I have to say, 2 years ago, none of us would have been talking in this way about these opportunities of, you know, like the Montalvo Park and seeing the incredible improvement there. And some of the other slides that just showed the difference in compost use and the things that are happening down in San Diego County. And I am just so pleased, proud of the work that we're doing, because this is really, really important work. And the carbon sequestration, the benefits of utilizing these recovered organic waste products are so enormous. And so thank you all. I so appreciate it. I can't be more grateful and appreciate your time for being here. I hope you found that the sharing was helpful, and continue to send your ideas to Ray and the team through the SLCP inbox of future webinars that you would like us to put on, or potential speakers. We are happy to continue this. I think it's been very fruitful to have this opportunity for sharing. So keep those ideas coming. Thanks, Ray.